The phone call came at 3 in the morning, jarring me from the deepest sleep I'd had in weeks. My hand fumbled across the nightstand, knocking over my reading glasses before finding my cell phone. The caller ID showed Tommy's name, my 8-year-old grandson, and my heart immediately clenched with worry. Children don't call their grandmothers at 3 a.m. unless something is terribly wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Grandma Evelyn? His small voice came through the speaker, thick with tears and barely above a whisper. Can you come get me, please? I was already throwing back my covers, my feet hitting the cold hardwood floor of my bedroom. Tommy, sweetheart, what's wrong? Where's your daddy? He's asleep, but Grandma, I heard him talking on the phone earlier. He said something really scary. Tommy's voice broke, and I could hear him trying to muffle his sobs. He said you'll be gone soon, and then everything will be different. My blood ran cold. Gone soon. I gripped the phone tighter, my mind racing through possibilities, none of them good. Tommy, are you safe right now? Are you in your room? Yes, I'm hiding under my blankets. Grandma, what did Daddy mean? You're not going anywhere, are you? You promised we'd go fishing next weekend. I was already pulling on my jeans, one-handed, the phone pressed against my ear. I'm coming to get you right now, okay? Stay quiet, stay in your room, and don't let anyone know you called me. But what about Daddy? The question hit me like a physical blow. What about Marcus, my son, Tommy's father? The man I'd raised, loved, supported through every mistake and triumph for 32 years. The same man who, apparently, was discussing my imminent absence with someone in the middle of the night. Don't worry about your daddy right now. Just focus on staying safe until I get there. I hung up and stood in my bedroom, surrounded by the familiar comfort of my small ranch house in Millbrook, trying to process what I'd just heard. Marcus lived 20 minutes away in a neighborhood I'd helped him afford, in a house where I spent every weekend watching Tommy while he worked his construction jobs. I was there for soccer practice pickups, homework help, and bedtime stories. I was the stability in that little boy's life after his mother Sarah had walked out 2 years ago, leaving nothing but a note and a forwarded address in California. My hands shook as I grabbed my car keys and headed for the garage. The October air was sharp and cold, cutting through my hastily thrown-on sweater. As I backed out of my driveway, my mind kept replaying Tommy's words. He said you'll be gone soon. What could that possibly mean? The drive to Marcus's house felt endless, every red light an eternity, every empty street a reminder of how alone we were at this hour. I'd raised Marcus as a single mother after his father died in a factory accident when Marcus was only 6. We'd been a team, him and me, fighting our way through poverty, through the nights when I worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table and a roof over our heads. When Tommy was born, I thought we'd finally found our happy ending. 3 generations of our little family, close-knit and loving. But things had been different lately. Marcus had been distant, evasive, and increasingly short-tempered with me. He'd started making comments about how I was getting older and might not be able to handle Tommy much longer. I'd brushed it off as stress from work, from being a single father, from the financial pressures that seemed to crush him despite my constant help. I pulled into his driveway and sat in my car for a moment, staring at the dark house. Only Tommy's bedroom window showed a faint glow from his nightlight. The rest of the house was black, quiet, sleeping. Or pretending to sleep. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. I see your car. Daddy's still asleep. My window is unlocked. Smart boy. I'd taught him that, actually, during one of our safety talks. Always have an escape route, I'd told him, thinking of fires or emergencies. I never imagined he'd need to escape from his own father. I crept around to the side of the house, grateful that Marcus had never bothered to fix the motion sensor light that had been broken for months. Tommy's bedroom was on the ground floor, a blessing I'd never appreciated until now. His window slid open silently, and his small face appeared in the gap. "Grandma," he whispered, relief flooding his voice. "Come on, baby. We're going to my house." He climbed through the window with the practiced ease of a child who'd clearly done this before, landing softly in the mulch beside his father's neglected flower bed. He was wearing his dinosaur pajamas and clutching a stuffed elephant I'd given him for his 6th birthday. We walked quickly to my car, Tommy's small hand gripping mine with desperate strength. It wasn't until we were both buckled in and pulling out of the driveway that I allowed myself to breathe. "Grandma, are you really going somewhere?" Tommy asked as we drove through the quiet streets of his neighborhood. "Not if I can help it, sweetheart. Tell me exactly what you heard your daddy say." Tommy was quiet for a moment, staring out at the passing streetlights. I got up to get some water, and I heard him talking on the phone in the kitchen. He was being really quiet, but I could hear him through the vent in my room. The heating vent, another thing I'd taught him about during our games of hide and seek. "Sound carries through those old ducts," I'd explained, when he'd been amazed that he could hear me talking to myself in the kitchen from his bedroom. He said something about papers being ready, and then he said... Tommy's voice got very small. He said, "Once the old lady is gone, everything changes. The house, the money, all of it. Tommy won't need a babysitter anymore." My stomach dropped. The house. My house. The one I'd lived in for 15 years. The one I'd nearly finished paying off. The one Marcus had been asking pointed questions about lately. Questions about my will. About what would happen to my assets if something happened to me. Questions I'd answered honestly because he was my son, my only family besides Tommy, and I'd never imagined he'd use that information against me. Did he say anything else? He said something about insurance, and then he said, "She trusts me completely, she'll never see it coming." The words hit me like ice water. Insurance. I had a life insurance policy, a substantial one, that I'd taken out years ago when Marcus was still in high school. He was the beneficiary. In the event of my death, he'd receive $200,000. Enough to pay off his mortgage. Enough to give Tommy a comfortable life. Enough to make losing me financially beneficial. But Marcus had always known about the insurance. That wasn't new information. What was new was the timing, the secrecy, the late-night phone calls. And the phrase that kept echoing in my head, "She'll never see it coming." We pulled into my driveway, and I helped Tommy out of the car. He was shivering, though whether from cold or fear I couldn't tell. Inside my warm kitchen, I made him hot chocolate while my mind raced through the implications of what he'd overheard. "Grandma, why would Daddy want you to go away?" Tommy asked, wrapped in one of my quilts, his hands wrapped around his mug. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that his father might be planning something unthinkable? How do you tell a child that the person who's supposed to protect him might be capable of hurting someone he loves? "I don't know, baby, but we're gonna figure it out together, okay?" Tommy nodded, trusting me completely in the way that children do, the same way I'd trusted Marcus completely, the same way that trust might be used against me. I tucked Tommy into the guest bedroom that had become his unofficial second home, surrounding him with extra blankets and the nightlight I kept plugged in just for his visits. "Try to get some sleep. Tomorrow we'll have pancakes."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"And maybe go to the park." "Promise you won't leave while I'm sleeping?" The question broke my heart. "I promise. I'm not going anywhere." But as I sat in my kitchen at 4 in the morning, staring at my phone and wondering who I could trust with this information, I realized that promise might be harder to keep than either of us knew. I made coffee and tried to think rationally about what I'd heard. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Marcus was talking about something else entirely. Maybe gone meant something innocent, like a vacation or a move to a senior community. Maybe the insurance comment was about something completely unrelated. But deep in my gut, I knew better. A mother's intuition is rarely wrong, even when it comes to the worst possible scenarios involving her own child. I pulled out my laptop and started researching. How easy would it be to make someone's death look accidental? What would the insurance investigation process involve? How quickly could benefits be paid out? The questions made me sick to my stomach, but I needed to know what I might be facing. The answers were more terrifying than I'd expected. Accidental deaths, especially in elderly people, were often barely investigated. A fall down the stairs, a slip in the bathtub, a medication mix-up. Any of these could be attributed to age-related clumsiness or confusion. And I was 68 years old, living alone, with no other family besides Marcus, to question the circumstances of my death. The insurance policy would pay out within 30 days of a death certificate being issued, assuming no red flags were raised during the initial review. $200,000. Enough to solve all of Marcus's financial problems at the cost of my life. I closed the laptop and walked to my bedroom window, looking out at the quiet street where I'd lived peacefully for so many years. Had I made myself vulnerable by being so trusting? By giving Marcus keys to my house, access to my financial information, knowledge of my routines and habits? My phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus. Mom, Tommy's not in his room. Do you know where he is? I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. He's with me. He called upset about a nightmare. Bring him home. Now. The tone was commanding, aggressive in a way that Marcus had never used with me before. I could feel the shift in our relationship through those 3 words. This wasn't my son asking his mother for help. This was someone angry that their plans had been disrupted. He's sleeping. I'll bring him back in the morning. I said, now, Mom, don't make this difficult. Make this difficult. As if I were the one creating problems by protecting a frightened child. As if I were the one who had changed the fundamental dynamic of our family with late-night phone calls about insurance money and convenient accidents. I didn't respond to his text. Instead, I double-checked all my door locks and turned on the porch light. If Marcus wanted to escalate this situation, he'd have to do it where the neighbors could see. 10 minutes later, headlights swept across my front windows. A car door slammed, and heavy footsteps approached my front door. The doorbell rang once, then again, then continuously as someone leaned on it with increasing frustration. I walked to the front hall but didn't open the door. Marcus, Tommy is sleeping. Whatever you need to discuss can wait until morning. Open the door, Mom. His voice was muffled but clearly angry. We need to talk. We can talk tomorrow. Open the goddamn door! The shouting woke Tommy, and I heard his bedroom door creak open. He appeared in the hallway, elephant clutched against his chest, eyes wide with fear. Is that Daddy? He whispered. I nodded, putting a finger to my lips. The doorbell had stopped ringing, but I could hear Marcus moving around on my front porch. A moment later, I heard the distinct sound of a key sliding into my back door lock. He was using the spare key I'd given him years ago for emergencies, the key I'd never thought to ask for back, even when our relationship had started to change. The key that was about to let him into my house at 4:30 in the morning while I stood there in my pajamas with his frightened son. Tommy, go to my bedroom and lock the door, I whispered urgently. He didn't argue, disappearing down the hall as quietly as he'd appeared. I heard my bedroom door close and the lock click just as my kitchen door opened. Marcus stepped into my house like he owned it, which I was beginning to realize he believed he did. Or would, very soon. He was dressed in dark clothes, and his face held an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating, and utterly without the warmth I'd known for 32 years. Where is he? Marcus demanded, not bothering with pleasantries or explanations. He's safe. That's all you need to know. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Safe? Mom, he's 8 years old. I'm his father. He belongs with me. Not when he's afraid of you. Afraid of me? Marcus stepped closer, and I instinctively backed toward the hallway that led to my bedroom. What kind of poison have you been putting in his head? I haven't said anything to him, Marcus. But he heard your phone call tonight. He heard you talking about me being gone soon, about insurance money, about how I'd never see something coming. The change in Marcus's expression was immediate and telling. The angry confusion was replaced by something much more dangerous, the look of someone who'd been caught in the act. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. Explain why you're making late-night phone calls about my death. Explain why my grandson is so scared he climbed out his bedroom window to escape his own father. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence, I saw the son I'd raised disappear completely. What stood in my kitchen now was a stranger who happened to share my DNA. You want the truth, Mom? Fine. You're 68 years old. You're slowing down, getting forgetful, becoming a burden. Tommy needs stability, not a babysitter who might have a heart attack while she's watching him. The words stung, partly because there was a grain of truth in them. I was getting older. I did forget things sometimes. But I was far from the helpless elderly woman he was describing. So your solution is to kill me? I never said anything about killing you. But his eyes said otherwise. I just think it's time for you to step back, maybe move into assisted living, let me handle Tommy's care without interference. And if I refuse? Marcus shrugged. Accidents happen, Mom, especially to older people living alone. Falls, medication errors, break-ins gone wrong. The world is a dangerous place. There it was. The threat I'd been dreading, delivered with the casual tone someone might use to discuss the weather. My son, the baby I'd nursed through pneumonia, taught to ride a bike, cheered for at every baseball game and graduation, was standing in my kitchen threatening my life for insurance money. Tommy heard you, Marcus. He knows what you're planning. Tommy is 8. Kids have vivid imaginations. They misunderstand things. Marcus smiled, and the expression was more terrifying than his anger had been. Besides, who's going to believe him if something happens to his confused old grandmother? Especially when his devoted father is so grief-stricken by the tragic accident. The calculated coldness of his words made my stomach turn. This wasn't a desperate man making impulsive threats. This was someone who'd thought through every angle, every possible outcome, every way to avoid consequences. The insurance company will investigate. Not if there's no reason to. A 68-year-old woman with high blood pressure and arthritis falls down her basement stairs while doing laundry? That's not suspicious, Mom. That's Tuesday. High blood pressure, arthritis, medical conditions he knew about, because I'd confided in him, trusted him with my health information the same way I'd trusted him with everything else. You've thought this through. I've had to. Do you know what it costs to raise a child alone? Do you know what Tommy's college is going to cost? What happens if I get injured and can't work? Marcus's voice rose with what sounded like genuine frustration. You're sitting on all this money, this house, this insurance, and for what? You're not going to live forever anyway. So you decided to speed up the timeline. I decided to be practical. Tommy needs security, needs a future. Your death benefits him more than your life does. The brutality of the statement left me speechless. This was how my son saw me now. Not as a person with value beyond my financial assets, but as a problem to be solved. An obstacle to be removed. Tommy loves me. Tommy is 8. He'll get over it. Kids are resilient. I thought about the little boy locked in my bedroom, probably listening to this entire conversation through the heating vent he'd learned to use as his early warning system. Resilient or not, hearing your father discuss murdering your grandmother was not something a child should ever have to endure. What about you, Marcus? Will you get over it? For the first time since he'd entered my house, Marcus hesitated. A flicker of something that might have been conscience crossed his face before disappearing again. You raised me to be practical, Mom, to make hard decisions, to do whatever it takes to protect my family. I never taught you to murder people for money. You taught me that family comes first. Tommy is my family, you're... He paused, searching for the right words. You're an investment that's no longer paying dividends. The dehumanization was complete. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was a financial instrument that had outlived its usefulness. So what happens now? You kill me tonight, with Tommy in the house? Of course not. I'm not a monster, Mom. I'd never traumatize my son like that. Marcus spoke as if this consideration made him noble, rather than simply strategic. This conversation never happened. You bring Tommy home in the morning, things go back to normal for a while. And then, when the time is right, when Tommy is safely at school or with friends, you'll have an unfortunate accident. The casual way he outlined my murder made my blood run cold. He'd already planned it out, already figured out how to minimize Tommy's trauma while maximizing his own financial gain. And you think you'll get away with this? I think a grieving son dealing with his mother's accidental death will receive a lot of sympathy and very little scrutiny. Marcus checked his watch. It's almost 5 a.m. Tommy needs to get some sleep before school. Let's go. No, The word came out stronger than I felt, but I was proud of myself for saying it. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. If Marcus wanted to destroy our family for money, he was going to have to fight for it. Mom, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder than murdering your own mother? I can't imagine how it could get much harder than that. Marcus sighed, like I was being unreasonably difficult about something trivial. Fine. We'll do this the hard way. He pulled out his phone and dialed 911. I listened in amazement as he transformed into a concerned son reporting his confused elderly mother who had kidnapped his child in the middle of the night. Yes, I need help. My 8-year-old son is missing, and I believe my mother, who has been showing signs of dementia, may have taken him. She's been increasingly confused and paranoid lately, and I'm worried about his safety. Dementia. Confused. Paranoid. With a few sentences, Marcus was laying the groundwork to discredit anything I might say about his plans. If I accused him of plotting my murder, it would sound like the delusions of a sick old woman. He gave the dispatcher my address and hung up. The police will be here in 10 minutes. When they arrive, you're going to explain that Tommy had a nightmare and called you for comfort. You're going to apologize for not communicating better with me about the situation. And then you're going to bring him home like a normal grandmother would. And if I tell them what you told me? Marcus smiled that cold, calculating smile again. Then you'll sound like a paranoid old woman making wild accusations against her devoted son. They'll recommend a mental health evaluation, maybe suggest that Tommy shouldn't be left in the care of someone who's clearly losing her grip on reality. He had thought of everything, every angle, every possible response, every way to position himself as the victim and me as the problem. I realized with growing horror that this conversation had been as much about establishing his narrative as it had been about threatening me. You recorded this, didn't you? Marcus held up his phone, showing me the recording app that was still running. Just the parts where you sound unstable and paranoid, the parts where you accuse your loving son of planning to murder you for insurance money. The parts that will convince any jury that you are suffering from serious mental decline in your final weeks. My final weeks. He was already talking about my death as a certainty, already planning how to use this conversation as evidence of my deteriorating mental state. The sound of sirens in the distance cut through the early morning quiet. In a few minutes, police officers would be at my door, and I'd have to decide how much of the truth to tell and how much I could prove. One more thing, Mom, Marcus said, pocketing his phone. If you try to keep Tommy from me, if you make any accusations you can't prove, I'll file for emergency custody. I have documentation of your increasing confusion, your inability to provide adequate care. Tommy will be with me full-time, and you'll be in a locked memory care facility within a week. The ultimate threat. Not just my life, but my access to the grandson who had become the light of my world. Marcus would use the system, use my age and his carefully constructed narrative, to isolate me completely before finishing what he'd started. You've thought of everything. I learned from the best. You always told me to have a backup plan. The sirens were getting closer, and I could see red and blue lights reflecting off my neighbor's windows. In my bedroom, Tommy was probably terrified, listening to his father destroy both our lives with the efficiency of accountant balancing books. What happens to Tommy when he realizes what you've done? For the first time, Marcus looked uncertain. He'll understand when he's older. He'll see that everything I did was for him, to secure his future. He'll see that his father murdered his grandmother for money. That's what he'll understand. No. Marcus's voice was firm, but I caught the doubt underneath. He'll remember you as his loving grandmother who passed away tragically. I'll make sure of that. The police cars pulled into my driveway, their headlights flooding my living room with harsh white light. Marcus smoothed his hair and arranged his expression into one of concern and relief. Showtime, Mom. Remember, you're confused and sorry. Tommy had a nightmare. You overreacted. You should have called me first. Can you handle that? Or do I need to start documenting more signs of your declining mental state? I looked at my son, this stranger wearing Marcus's face, and realized that the child I'd raised was already gone. Whatever had taken his place was capable of anything, justified by nothing more than financial convenience and ruthless practicality. The doorbell rang, followed by a firm knock. Police. We received a call about a missing child. Marcus looked at me expectantly, waiting to see if I'd play along with his script or try to tell the truth that no one would believe. In my bedroom, Tommy was depending on me to keep him safe. But how could I protect him when his greatest threat was the one person who should love him unconditionally? I walked to the front door, my hand on the deadbolt, knowing that whatever I said in the next few minutes would determine not just my fate, but Tommy's future as well. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders as I prepared to face the officers who had no idea they were walking into a family destroyed by greed, where a mother's love had been weaponized against her, and a child's trust was about to become another casualty. I turned the deadbolt and opened the door, seeing my reflection in the officer's sunglasses as the morning light crept across my front porch. Behind me, Marcus waited to see if I'd choose the safety of silence or the danger of truth. The choice I made would echo through all our lives, but standing there in my doorway, with my grandson's frightened voice still ringing in my ears, I realized there was really no choice at all. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible to win. Officer Rebecca Martinez stepped into my foyer with the kind of professional calm that comes from years of handling domestic situations. Her partner, a younger man whose badge read Officer Chen, positioned himself near the doorway while scanning the room with trained eyes. "Mrs. Stevens, I'm Officer Martinez. We received a call about your grandson being missing from his father's home. Can you tell us what happened?" Before I could answer, Marcus stepped forward with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed this moment. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly. My mother has been having some confusion lately, and I think she panicked when Tommy called her about a nightmare. She came and got him without letting me know, and I was terrified when I found his room empty." The concern in his voice was perfect, the slight tremor exactly what you'd expect from a worried parent. If I hadn't just heard him casually discuss my murder, I might have believed it myself. "Mrs. Stevens?" Officer Martinez turned her attention to me. "Can you walk us through what happened from your perspective?" I stood there in my pajamas and robe, acutely aware of how I must look to these officers. A 68-year-old woman who had taken a child from his home in the middle of the night. The confusion Marcus had mentioned would seem entirely plausible. Tommy called me around 3 a.m. He was upset, frightened. I went to get him. "And you didn't think to contact his father first?" The question was reasonable, the kind any rational person would ask, the kind that made my actions seem suspicious rather than protective. He was scared. I just wanted to help him. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder, the gesture appearing supportive to the officers while feeling like a threat to me. "Mom has been getting more confused lately. Sometimes she overreacts to situations, doesn't think things through the way she used to." Officer Chen made a note in his pad. "Has Tommy stayed with you before, Mrs. Stevens?" "Of course. I watch him regularly. He has his own room here, his clothes, his toys." "Which is part of the concern," Marcus interjected smoothly. "She's been becoming more possessive lately, more reluctant to let Tommy go home. I've been worried about her attachment becoming unhealthy." The word unhealthy hung in the air like an accusation. Marcus was painting me as an unstable older woman whose love for her grandson had become obsessive. To officers who didn't know our history, who couldn't see the years of devotion and care, it would sound reasonable. "Can we speak with Tommy?" Officer Martinez asked. My heart clenched. Tommy would tell them exactly what he'd heard, and Marcus was prepared for that. The recording on his phone would make Tommy's account sound like the confused ramblings of a child influenced by his paranoid grandmother. "He's sleeping," I said quietly. "Ma'am, we need to verify that the child is safe and unharmed." There was no arguing with that. I led them down the hallway to my bedroom, Marcus following behind us like a shadow. I knocked gently on the door. "Tommy? It's Grandma. There are some police officers here who need to see that you're okay." The lock clicked, and Tommy appeared in the doorway, still clutching his stuffed elephant. His eyes immediately went to his father, and I saw him shrink back slightly. Hey, buddy, Marcus said, his voice warm and reassuring. You scared Daddy, warm and reassuring. You scared Daddy when you weren't in your room. Are you okay? Tommy nodded but moved closer to me rather than to his father. Officer Martinez noticed the movement. Tommy, can you tell us what happened tonight? Why did you call your grandmother? Tommy looked up at me, then back at the officers. I had a bad dream, and I heard Daddy talking on the phone. He said scary things, so I called Grandma. What kind of scary things? Officer Chen asked, crouching down to Tommy's eye level. This was the moment Marcus had prepared for. I watched him position himself where Tommy could see him, a subtle reminder of who held the power in this situation. He said Grandma was going to go away soon, and everything would change. Tommy's voice was small, uncertain. Sometimes grown-ups talk about difficult things that kids don't understand, Marcus said gently. Remember how we talked about Grandma getting older? Sometimes older people need special care, and that might mean changes for our family. The manipulation was masterful. Marcus was reframing Tommy's account in real time, making it sound like the innocent concern of a son worried about his aging mother, rather than the cold calculation I'd witnessed. Officer Martinez looked between us. Mrs. Stevens, have you and your son discussed any changes to Tommy's living arrangements? Not the kind he's implying, I said carefully. What my mother means, Marcus said, is that she's been resistant to acknowledging her limitations. I've been trying to have conversations about her future care needs, but she becomes upset and sometimes misinterprets things. I understand exactly what you're planning, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. See? Marcus turned to the officers. This is what I'm talking about. She becomes paranoid, accusatory. It's been getting worse over the past few months. Officer Martinez studied my face. Mrs. Stevens, are you concerned about your son's intentions regarding your care? The question was my opening, my chance to tell them what I'd heard. But Marcus was right about how it would sound. A paranoid old woman accusing her devoted son of planning to murder her for insurance money. Without proof, without evidence, it would only reinforce his narrative about my mental decline. I'm concerned about what's best for Tommy, I said instead, which is exactly why we need to resolve this situation, Marcus said. Tommy needs stability, routine. Midnight rescues and accusations aren't healthy for him. Officer Chen finished writing and looked up. Mr. Stevens, would you be willing to bring Tommy back to your home if your mother agrees to better communication in the future? Of course. That's all I've ever wanted. The officers looked at me expectantly. Tommy was pressed against my side, his small body trembling slightly. I could feel his fear, his confusion about why the adults in his life were having this conversation with strangers. Tommy needs to get some sleep before school, I said finally. Absolutely. Tommy, say goodbye to Grandma. You'll see her again soon. Tommy looked up at me with eyes that held too much understanding for an 8-year-old. You promised you wouldn't leave while I was sleeping. The words were a knife to my heart. I'm not leaving, baby, but you need to go home with Daddy for now. But what if he talks on the phone again? Marcus laughed, the sound perfectly pitched to suggest a child's overactive imagination. Buddy, Daddy talks on the phone for work all the time. That's nothing to worry about. But you said, sometimes when we're sleepy we don't hear things correctly, Marcus interrupted smoothly. Just like how dreams can seem real even though they're not. Tommy looked confused, his 8-year-old mind struggling to reconcile what he'd clearly heard with his father's gentle dismissal. I watched Marcus erase his son's trust in his own perceptions with surgical precision. Officer Martinez handed me a card. Mrs. Stevens, if you have any concerns about your grandson's welfare, don't hesitate to call us. But in the future, please coordinate with his father before removing him from his home. I took the card, knowing it was meaningless. What was I going to report? That my son was planning my death, based on a conversation no one else had witnessed? That an 8-year-old's testimony was being dismissed as confusion and bad dreams? Come on, Tommy, Marcus said, extending his hand. Let's go home. Tommy reluctantly let go of my side and took his father's hand. As they walked toward the door, he turned back to look at me one more time. I love you, Grandma, I love you too, sweetheart, so very much. And then they were gone, the police officers following them out into the pre-dawn darkness. I stood in my empty foyer, listening to car doors slam and engines start, knowing I'd just watched my grandson walk away with someone who saw him as nothing more than a convenient witness to control. I deadbolted the door and leaned against it, my legs suddenly weak. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading, leaving behind the stark reality of my situation. Marcus had won this round decisively. He'd turned my rescue of Tommy into evidence of my instability, my concern into paranoia, my love into an unhealthy obsession. Worse, he'd demonstrated just how easy it would be to discredit me if I tried to expose his plans. The recording on his phone, combined with tonight's police report, would create a paper trail showing my declining mental state. Any accusations I made would be filtered through that lens. I walked to my kitchen and made coffee, my hands shaking as I measured the grounds. Through my window, I could see the sun beginning to rise over my quiet neighborhood. Normal people were starting their normal days, unaware that a few houses away, a man was planning his mother's murder with the methodical precision of a business transaction. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Thanks for understanding, Mom. Let's let things settle down for a few days. I'll call you later in the week." A few days. Time for him to reinforce his narrative with Tommy, to plant seeds of doubt about my stability, to prepare the groundwork for whatever he was planning next. Time for me to sit in my house and wait for him to decide when and how I would die. I deleted the message without responding and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Tommy did his homework, where we worked on jigsaw puzzles, where we had breakfast every weekend morning. The normal, loving routine that Marcus was willing to destroy for $200,000. But I wasn't going to make it easy for him. If my son thought I'd simply accept my fate, he'd underestimated the woman who'd raised him. I'd survived poverty, widowhood, and years of fighting for every opportunity I'd given him. I wasn't going to let him murder me without a fight. The first thing I needed was proof. The recording on Marcus's phone worked both ways. If he'd captured parts of our conversation that made me sound paranoid, he'd also captured his own threats. The problem was getting access to evidence that was literally in his pocket. I opened my laptop and started researching. How do you prove someone is planning your murder when they've been careful to avoid leaving obvious evidence? How do you protect yourself when the person threatening you has legal authority over the only witness who could corroborate your story? The answers weren't encouraging. Without direct evidence of Marcus's plans, without witnesses to our conversation, without proof of his motives beyond speculation, I had very little legal recourse. Restraining orders required specific threats. Police intervention required credible evidence. Even if I hired a private investigator, what would they find? A man living paycheck to paycheck, who stood to inherit a substantial sum when his mother died? That described half the adult children in America. My phone rang, startling me from my research. The caller ID showed my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman who lived across the street. "Evelyn? I saw the police cars at your house this morning. Is everything all right?" Mrs. Chen was 82 and kept track of the entire neighborhood from her front window. If anyone would have noticed unusual activity around my house, it would be her. "Just a misunderstanding with Tommy's father. Nothing serious." "Oh, good. I was worried. I've been meaning to mention that I've seen that son of yours around your house at odd hours lately. Yesterday afternoon, I saw him going into your backyard when your car wasn't in the driveway." My blood chilled. "What time yesterday?" "Around 2 o'clock, I think. I was having lunch and noticed him walking around to your back door. I assumed you'd asked him to check on something, but then I realized you usually tell me when someone's going to be here while you're out. Marcus had been in my house while I was at my doctor's appointment. He'd used his key to enter my home without my knowledge or permission. But why? Did you see him leave?" "About an hour later. He was carrying what looked like a toolbox." A toolbox. My mind raced through possibilities. Had he been installing something? Removing something? Planting evidence of my supposed confusion? Setting up whatever method he planned to use for my accident? "Mrs. Chen, would you be willing to write down what you saw?" just in case there are any questions later? Of course, dear. Is there something I should be concerned about? How much could I tell her without sounding like the paranoid old woman Marcus had painted me as? I'm just being cautious. You know how it is when family dynamics get complicated? After I hung up, I walked through my house with new eyes, looking for anything that might have been changed or added during Marcus's unauthorized visit. In my basement, I found what I was looking for. The handrail on my basement stairs had been loosened. Not obviously, not in a way that would be immediately noticeable, but enough that it would give way under sudden weight. Anyone unfamiliar with the damage might grab it for support while carrying laundry or retrieving stored items, only to have it fail at the critical moment. The basement stairs were concrete, steep, and unforgiving. A fall would likely be fatal for someone my age, and it would look completely accidental. An elderly woman loses her balance, grabs for support that isn't there, and tumbles to her death in her own home. I took pictures of the loosened handrail with my phone, documenting the deliberately sabotaged screws that had been backed out just enough to compromise the structure. This was my proof. This was evidence that someone had intentionally created a death trap in my home. But even as I photographed the evidence, I realized how easily it could be explained away. Handrails loosen over time. Old houses require maintenance. A 68-year-old woman living alone might not notice gradually failing hardware until it was too late. Marcus had chosen his method well. Even if investigators found the loosened handrail suspicious, there would be no way to prove he'd tampered with it. His fingerprints belonged on my stair rail. He'd helped me with household repairs for years. I climbed back upstairs and called a handyman I'd used before. Jim? It's Evelyn Stevens. I need someone to come out today to secure my basement handrail. It's become dangerous. Sure thing, Mrs. Stevens. I can be there around noon. What happened? It just needs tightening. Safety issue. I'll bring my tools and get it fixed right up. After I hung up, I realized that fixing the handrail would eliminate the evidence of Marcus's sabotage, but leaving it alone meant living with a death trap he'd installed in my own home. The choice between preserving evidence and preserving my life wasn't much of a choice at all. I spent the morning researching private investigators, security systems, and legal options for elderly people facing threats from family members. The information was sobering. Elder abuse was notoriously difficult to prove, especially when it came from adult children who maintained facades of caring concern. At 11:30, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Jim standing on my porch with his toolbox. I let him in and led him to the basement. "Whoa," he said, examining the handrail. "Mrs. Stevens, this is really loose. When did you first notice it?" "This morning." Jim tested the rail, and it shifted dramatically under poor stance. Minimal pressure. "This didn't happen overnight. These screws have been backing out for a while. You're lucky you didn't fall." "Can you tell if someone might have tampered with it?" Jim gave me a curious look. "Tampered with it? Ma'am, why would someone do that?" "Just wondering if it could have been loosened deliberately." He examined the screws more closely. "Well, these are all backed out to almost the same degree, which is a little unusual. Usually, when hardware fails naturally, you see more variation. But I couldn't say for certain that someone did this on purpose. But it's possible." "Possible, sure. But why would someone want to loosen your handrail?" I didn't answer that question. Instead, I watched him secure the rail properly, making my basement stairs safe again while erasing the evidence of my son's first attempt on my life. After Jim left, I sat in my living room and faced the reality of my situation. Marcus had already made one attempt to set up my death. The loosened handrail proved he was serious about his plans, not just making threats in the heat of anger. And now that I'd discovered and fixed his trap, he'd know he needed to escalate to more direct methods. My phone rang. "Marcus." "Hi, Mom, how are you feeling today?" The casual tone, the caring concern, the perfect imitation of a devoted son checking on his mother. If I hadn't heard his real voice in my kitchen 12 hours ago, I might have believed it was genuine. "I'm fine, Marcus." "Good, good. Listen, I was thinking Tommy and I should come over for dinner tomorrow night. Maybe we can all talk about what happened and clear the air." Clear the air. More likely, he wanted to gauge whether I suspected his handrail sabotage, whether I'd told anyone about our confrontation, whether I was going to be a problem that needed immediate resolution. I don't think that's a good idea right now. Mom, we can't let this situation fester. Tommy is confused about last night. He needs to see that his family is okay, that Grandma and Daddy can work things out. Using Tommy as emotional leverage. Of course, Marcus would weaponize my love for my grandson to manipulate me into vulnerability. Tommy seemed pretty clear about what he heard you say on the phone. Tommy is 8 years old and was half asleep when he thought he heard something that scared him. You know how kids can misunderstand things, especially when they're already anxious. Are you saying he's lying? I'm saying he's confused. Which is why we need to get together as a family and reassure him that everything is normal. Normal. There was that word again. Marcus's version of normal involved my death and Tommy's trauma, but as long as it looked normal from the outside, that was all that mattered. I need some time to think, Marcus. Think about what? Mom, you're starting to worry me. This paranoid thinking, these accusations, the way you kidnapped Tommy last night. Maybe we should talk to your doctor about having you evaluated. There it was, the next step in his campaign to discredit me. If I didn't cooperate with his plans, I'd be declared mentally incompetent and removed from Tommy's life entirely. Either way, Marcus got what he wanted. I'll call you later in the week, I said, and hung up before he could respond. I turned off my phone and sat in the growing afternoon shadows, thinking about my options. I could run, but where would I go that Marcus couldn't find me? I could call the police, but what would I tell them that would sound credible? I could hire a bodyguard, but how long could I afford that kind of protection? Or I could fight back. The idea formed slowly, built from years of watching Marcus manipulate situations to his advantage. He was counting on me being passive, being the frightened elderly victim who would either submit to his plans or be dismissed as mentally unstable. But what if I refused to play that role? What if I turned his own tactics against him? I turned my phone back on and called my attorney, Harold Brennan, a man I'd known for 15 years who'd handled my will and estate planning. Evelyn, how are you doing? Harold, I need to see you as soon as possible. Today, if you can manage it. Is everything all right? You sound upset. I'm concerned about some family issues that might affect my estate. Can we meet this afternoon? Of course. How about 4 o'clock? I'll be there. Harold Brennan's office was in downtown Millbrook, in one of the restored Victorian houses that had been converted to professional spaces. I'd always found it comforting, with its warm wood paneling and old-fashioned attention to detail. Evelyn, what's going on? Harold asked after his secretary had brought us coffee and closed the door. I told him everything. The late-night phone call from Tommy, Marcus's threats in my kitchen, the loosened handrail in my basement, the police visit that had been orchestrated to make me look unstable. Harold listened without interruption, making occasional notes on his legal pad. That's quite a story, he said when I finished. Do you believe me? Harold leaned back in his leather chair, studying my face. I've known you for 15 years, Evelyn. You're one of the most level-headed people I've ever met, but what you're describing is unbelievable. That's exactly what Marcus is counting on. It's serious. If you're right about Marcus's intentions, you're in real danger, but proving it will be extremely difficult. What are my legal options? Harold pulled out a thick reference book and flipped through it while he talked. We could file for a restraining order, but based on what you've told me, there's not enough evidence of direct threats. We could report the handrail sabotage to police, but proving it was intentional would be nearly impossible. We could pursue a competency evaluation to counter any claims Marcus might make about your mental state, but that's defensive rather than protective. So there's nothing I can do legally to stop him? I didn't say that. Harold found the section he was looking for and began reading. There are some unconventional approaches we could consider. Such as? First, we revise your will immediately. Remove Marcus as beneficiary of your life insurance and estate. Make Tommy the primary beneficiary with a trustee to manage the funds until he reaches adulthood. The suggestion was elegant in its simplicity. If Marcus had no financial motive for my death, the threat would theoretically disappear. But wouldn't that make him angry? Possibly more dangerous? Possibly. Which is why we'd need to take additional precautions. Harold made more notes. We document everything. Every interaction with Marcus. Every threat. Every suspicious incident. We create a detailed record that would be admissible in court if something happens to you. You mean when something happens to me? Let's stay positive. We also consider some proactive measures. Security cameras around your home, possibly a personal security consultant, definitely a change of locks and security codes. Harold, I can't afford to live like a prisoner in my own home indefinitely. You're right. Which brings me to the most unconventional suggestion. Harold closed the reference book and looked directly at me. We set a trap. A trap? We create a situation where Marcus reveals his true intentions in a way that can be documented and used as evidence. Something that would hold up in court and protect you legally. The idea was intriguing, but terrifying. That sounds incredibly dangerous. It would be. But right now, you're already in danger. And you have no legal recourse. At least this way, you'd be in control of the situation instead of waiting for him to act. I thought about Tommy, about the fear in his voice when he'd called me in the middle of the night, about the way he'd shrunk away from his father when the police asked him questions, about the choice I'd have to make between my safety and his well-being. What kind of trap? Harold outlined a plan that was both brilliant and terrifying. We would revise my will and insurance beneficiaries, but we wouldn't tell Marcus immediately. Instead, we'd let him proceed with his plans while documenting everything. When he made his move, we'd be ready, with evidence, witnesses, and legal protection. The goal is to catch him in the act of attempting to harm you, but in a controlled situation where you're actually safe. And if something goes wrong? Then we make sure there's enough evidence to ensure he's convicted and Tommy is protected. I signed the new will documents, changed the beneficiaries on my insurance policies, and set up the legal framework for Harold's plan. By the time I left his office, I'd transformed from a potential victim into someone fighting back. The drive home gave me time to think about what I'd committed to. I was going to let my son believe he could murder me for money, while secretly documenting his attempts and preparing to have him arrested for attempted murder. It was the kind of plan that could easily go wrong in catastrophic ways. But it was better than waiting helplessly for him to choose the time and method of my death. At home, I called a security company and arranged for cameras to be installed the next morning. I changed all my locks and had a new security system put in. I documented everything that had happened in the past 24 hours, and stored copies of my new will and insurance documents in a safe deposit box Harold would have access to. By evening, I'd transformed my house into something between a fortress and a trap. Marcus would find it harder to access, but when he did, everything would be recorded. My phone rang at 8 o'clock. Tommy. Grandma, can you come get me, please? His voice was small and scared, and my heart immediately clenched with worry. What's wrong, baby? Daddy's been asking me lots of questions about last night, about what I heard him say on the phone. He keeps telling me I misunderstood, but I know what I heard. Where is your daddy now? He went to the store. But Grandma, I'm scared. He keeps looking at me funny, like he's mad that I told you about the phone call. Marcus was working on Tommy, trying to make him doubt his own perceptions, possibly getting angry that his son wasn't cooperating with the revision of events. Tommy, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you do that? Yes. I can't come get you tonight because it would cause more problems with the police. But I need you to remember something very important. What you heard your daddy say on the phone was real. You weren't confused or dreaming. Trust what you know you heard, okay? But Daddy says, Daddy is wrong. And Tommy, if you ever feel unsafe, if anything scary happens, you call me immediately. Even if Daddy tells you not to. Do you understand? I think so. I love you, sweetheart, more than anything in the world. I love you too, Grandma. Will you really be gone soon, like Daddy said? The question broke my heart. Not if I can help it, baby boy. Not if I can help it. After I hung up, I sat in my newly secured house and prepared for war. Marcus thought he was hunting an easy victim. Tomorrow, he was going to discover that his prey had teeth. The next morning brought both the security installation team and a text from Marcus. "Mom, Tommy and I are coming for dinner tonight, 6 p.m. We need to talk." Not a request, a demand. Marcus was escalating his timeline, probably concerned about Tommy's continued insistence on what he'd heard. My grandson was becoming a liability in his father's plan, which made Tommy even more vulnerable. I watched the security technicians install cameras covering every entrance to my house, every room where someone might attempt to harm me. The system would upload everything to a cloud server in real time, ensuring evidence would survive even if something happened to me. "Mrs. Stevens," the lead technician said as they finished, "this is a pretty comprehensive setup. You expecting some kind of trouble?" "Just being cautious." "Well, nobody's getting in here without us knowing about it." That was exactly what I was counting on. At 5:30, I texted Marcus. "Door will be unlocked. Come in when you arrive." At 6 o'clock sharp, I heard a car in my driveway. Through my front window, I watched Marcus walk up my driveway with Tommy trailing behind him. My grandson looked reluctant, scared, nothing like the excited little boy who usually ran to my door. Marcus didn't knock. He walked straight in as if he owned the place, Tommy following quietly behind. "Hi, Mom. Thanks for having us." "Hello, Marcus." "Hi, baby boy." Tommy managed a small smile and came over for a hug. I held him close, noting how thin he felt, how tense his small body was. "Something smells good," Marcus said, though I hadn't cooked anything. "I ordered pizza. Should be here soon." Marcus looked around my living room, and I wondered if he was noting the new security panel by the door, the subtle signs that I'd upgraded my home's defenses. "Mom, we really need to clear the air about last night. Tommy's been confused and upset, and I think there are some things we need to discuss." "What things?" "Your health, your safety, your ability to continue living independently." Marcus sat down on my couch with the casual confidence of someone who believed he controlled the situation. "I've been doing some research, and there are some excellent assisted living facilities in the area. Places where you'd have help when you need it, but still maintain your independence." "I don't need assisted living." "Mom, you kidnapped Tommy in the middle of the night because you thought I was planning to hurt you. That's not rational behavior." Tommy looked between us, his 8-year-old mind trying to process why his father was talking about his grandmother like she was crazy. "What I thought," I said carefully, "was that Tommy was scared and needed help." Tommy was confused by a conversation he overheard and misunderstood. "Weren't you, buddy?" Tommy looked at his father, then at me. I could see the internal struggle on his face, the choice between pleasing his father and telling the truth. "I heard what I heard," Tommy said quietly. Marcus's expression darkened slightly. "Tommy, we've talked about this. Sometimes when we're sleepy, we don't hear things correctly." "I wasn't sleepy. I was awake." "That's enough," Marcus said, his voice carrying a warning that made Tommy shrink back. "We're not going to keep discussing this." I watched my son intimidate his child into silence, and I realized that Tommy wasn't the only one in danger. Marcus was losing control of his narrative, and that made him unpredictable. The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. "That'll be the pizza," I said, but when I opened the door, it wasn't a delivery driver. It was Harold Brennan, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of serious expression that meant business. "Evelyn, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I have those documents you requested." Behind me, I heard Marcus stand up. "Mom, who is this?" "Harold Brennan, my attorney." "Harold, this is my son Marcus and my grandson Tommy." Harold entered my living room with the commanding presence that had made him successful in family law for 30 years. "Mr. Stevens, I'm glad you're here. There are some legal matters involving your mother's estate that affect you directly." Marcus looked confused and slightly alarmed. "What kind of legal matters?" "Perhaps we should discuss this privately," Harold suggested, glancing meaningfully at Tommy. "Tommy, why don't you go to your room and play for a little while?" I said. "Can I take my elephant?" "Of course, sweetheart." Tommy disappeared down the hallway, and I heard the guest room door close. Harold waited until he was sure we were alone before continuing. Mr. Stevens, your mother has made some significant changes to her will and insurance beneficiaries. I wanted to make sure you were aware of these changes. The color drained from Marcus's face. What kind of changes? Harold opened his briefcase and removed a folder. Your mother has removed you as the primary beneficiary of her life insurance policy and estate. The new primary beneficiary is Tommy, with a trust structure to manage the funds until he reaches adulthood. Marcus stared at the documents Harold was showing him. I could see his mind racing, calculating how this change affected his plans. Why would you do that? Mom? Because I want to make sure Tommy's future is secure, regardless of what happens to me. But I'm your son. I'm his father. And you'll continue to be his father. But the financial management will be handled by trustees until Tommy is old enough to make his own decisions. Quote, Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. If he killed me now, he wouldn't receive any financial benefit. The insurance money in my estate would go to Tommy, managed by people Marcus couldn't control. This is because of last night, isn't it? Because you think I'm some kind of threat to you? Harold leaned forward slightly. Mr. Stevens, your mother has expressed some concerns about family dynamics and wanted to ensure her grandson's interests are protected. What kind of concerns? This was the moment of truth. I could back down, let Marcus think the will change was just a precaution, and hope it would be enough to stop his plans. Or I could push forward with Harold's trap and force Marcus to reveal his true intentions. I'm concerned that you see me as more valuable dead than alive, I said quietly. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's ridiculous, Mom. You're my mother. I love you. Then why did you tell someone on the phone that I'd be gone soon and everything would change? Because I'm worried about your mental state. Because I think you need more care than you're getting living alone. And the insurance money? The part about me never seeing it coming? Marcus went very still. I never said anything about insurance money. Tommy heard you. Tommy is 8 years old and was half asleep. Harold was taking notes throughout this exchange, documenting everything for the record. Mr. Stevens, your mother is alleging that you made statements suggesting you planned to harm her. Is that accurate? Of course not. This is exactly what I'm talking about. She's becoming paranoid. Making wild accusations. She obviously can't live independently anymore. And yet, Harold said, consulting his notes, she was competent enough to execute complex legal documents just yesterday. Her mental state evaluation shows no signs of cognitive decline or impairment. Marcus looked between Harold and me, realizing he was being maneuvered into a corner. What is this, some kind of setup? This is a family discussion about estate planning, Harold said mildly. Bullshit. You're trying to trap me into saying something that makes me look bad. The mask was starting to slip. The concerned, devoted son was being replaced by someone angry and calculating. Nobody's trying to trap you, Marcus, I said. We're just trying to understand why Tommy is so scared of you. Why he called me in the middle of the night, terrified about what he'd heard. Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. This is insane. You're both insane if you think I'd hurt my own mother. Then explain the loosened handrail in my basement, I said quietly. The words stopped Marcus cold. He turned slowly to face me, and for the first time since he'd arrived, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. What are you talking about? Yesterday, while I was at my doctor's appointment, my neighbor saw you enter my house with a toolbox. This morning I discovered that my basement handrail had been deliberately loosened. The screws were backed out just enough to make it fail under weight. Harold was writing furiously, documenting every word of this confrontation. That's... Marcus started, then stopped. He couldn't deny being in my house. Mrs. Chen had seen him. That handrail was already loose. I noticed it last week and meant to fix it for you. So you made it looser? I was testing how bad it was. I must have forgotten to tighten it back up. The lie was weak, and we all knew it. Harold looked up from his notes. Mr. Stevens, are you saying you accidentally made a safety hazard worse and then forgot to fix it? I'm saying my mother is paranoid and looking for reasons to suspect me of something terrible. From down the hallway, we heard Tommy's door creak open. A moment later, his small voice called out, "Grandma? Is everything okay? Daddy sounds angry." The three of us looked toward the hallway, where Tommy was probably listening to every word through the heating vent I'd taught him about years ago. "Everything's fine, baby," I called back. "We're just talking." But Marcus was staring down the hallway with an expression I'd never seen before. Not love, not concern, but calculation. He was looking at his son like a problem to be solved. "Tommy's heard too much," Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to us. "Too much of what?" Harold asked. Marcus seemed to realize what he'd said and tried to recover. "Too much of this adult conversation. He shouldn't be listening to us discuss family finances and his grandmother's paranoid accusations." "He's not paranoid if someone is actually trying to hurt her," I said. "Nobody is trying to hurt anybody," Marcus exploded, his carefully maintained facade finally cracking completely. "You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I need money. Yes, your death would solve my financial problems. Yes, I've thought about what life would be like if you weren't around anymore. But thinking isn't the same as planning, and planning isn't the same as acting." Harold stopped writing and stared at Marcus. "Mr. Stevens, are you admitting that you've considered harming your mother for financial gain?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus realized what he'd just said, how it sounded, how it would look in Harold's notes and in any future legal proceedings. "I'm admitting that I'm desperate," Marcus said finally. "I'm a single father with more bills than income, and my mother is sitting on assets that could change my son's entire future. But wanting something and being willing to kill for it are completely different things." "Are they?" I asked. "Because Tommy heard you say I'd never see it coming." Marcus rubbed his face with both hands, looking older than his 32 years. "You're right. I said that. But I was talking about moving you into assisted living whether you wanted to go or not about killing you. And the insurance money would help pay for Tommy's care while we adjusted to you being gone. But gone to a care facility, not gone as in dead." Harold looked skeptical. "Mr. Stevens, your mother discovered that her basement handrail had been deliberately sabotaged after you were seen entering her home with tools. How do you explain that?" "I can't," Marcus said. "Not in a way you'll believe. Because you've already decided I'm some kind of monster who would murder his own mother for insurance money. I've decided that your mother deserves to feel safe in her own home," Harold replied. "And right now, she doesn't." Marcus looked at me with something that might have been genuine pain. "Mom, I know I've said terrible things. I know I've thought about scenarios that make me sound like a sociopath. But I would never actually hurt you. You have to believe that." I studied my son's face, looking for any trace of the boy I'd raised, the young man who'd cried when we buried his father, who'd held Tommy the night Sarah left and promised to be the best father he could be. "I want to believe that, Marcus, but you've made it impossible." "What do you mean?" "You threatened me in my own kitchen. You sabotaged my handrail to create a death trap. You intimidated your son to make him doubt what he heard. You orchestrated a police visit to make me look mentally unstable." I paused, letting each accusation sink in. "Even if you never intended to follow through, you've already done irreparable damage to our family." Marcus sank back down onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I'm drowning, Mom. The bills, the mortgage, Tommy's needs, the pressure of doing everything alone. When I think about the insurance money, about how much easier everything would be, it feels like the only solution to problems I can't solve any other way. So you decided I needed to die to make your life easier. I decided to explore the possibility, to think through what it would look like, how it could happen, whether I could actually go through with it." Marcus looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "But thinking about something and doing it are different things." Harold cleared his throat. "Mr. Stevens, exploring the possibility of murdering someone is called premeditation. It's what elevates murder charges to first degree. I haven't murdered anyone." "But you've admitted to planning it, to creating potentially fatal hazards in your mother's home, to making threats about her never seeing something coming." Marcus stood up again, this time moving toward the front door. This conversation is over. I'm taking my son and leaving. Actually, Harold said, pulling out his phone, I think we should let the police decide what happens next. You're calling the police? Your mother is in immediate danger from someone who has already demonstrated willingness to sabotage her home and who has admitted to planning her death for financial gain. Yes, I'm calling the police. Marcus looked panicked now, realizing that his admissions had trapped him in a way that his careful planning hadn't anticipated. I never admitted to planning her death. I admitted to thinking about it. The basement handrail suggests otherwise, I said quietly. Tommy! Marcus called out suddenly. We're leaving, now! But Tommy didn't appear. Instead, his small voice came from down the hallway. I don't want to go with you, Daddy. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His own son, the child he claimed to be protecting and providing for, was refusing to come with him. Tommy, get out here right now. No. Harold finished his call to the police. They're on their way. Mr. Stevens, I'd recommend you stay here until they arrive. But Marcus was already moving toward the hallway, his expression dark with anger and desperation. Tommy, I said now. I stepped in front of him, blocking his path to my grandson. You're not taking him anywhere. He's my son! He's a child who's afraid of you. And after what you've admitted to tonight, I understand why. Marcus grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging into my arms hard enough to bruise. Get out of my way, Mom. The physical contact was the last piece Harold needed for his legal case. Assault on an elderly person, witnessed by an officer of the court, after admissions of planning harm for financial gain. Let go of me, Marcus. Instead, he shook me, his face inches from mine. You've destroyed everything. Do you understand that? Everything I was trying to build for Tommy. Every plan I had to make our lives better. You've destroyed it all, with your paranoia and your lawyers and your security cameras. Security cameras. He'd noticed them after all. I protected myself and my grandson from someone who saw us as financial opportunities rather than family. Marcus released me so abruptly I stumbled. Fine. You want to play this game? You want to involve lawyers and police and make me out to be some kind of monster? Let's see how that works out for you. The threat was clear, and Harold caught every word. Mr. Stevens, I'd strongly advise you to stop making threats. But Marcus was beyond caring about legal advice. He was a man whose carefully constructed plans had collapsed in a single evening, who'd been outmaneuvered by the elderly mother he'd underestimated. You think you've won something here? Marcus said, backing toward the door. You think changing your will and installing cameras and bringing in lawyers makes you safe? You have no idea what I'm capable of when I have nothing left to lose. The sirens were getting closer now, red and blue lights beginning to flash through my front windows. Harold moved to the door to let the officers in, while I went to get Tommy from the guest room. I found him sitting on the bed, still clutching his stuffed elephant, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry, Grandma, he whispered. I'm sorry Daddy wants to hurt you. I sat beside him and pulled him into my arms. None of this is your fault, sweetheart. You were brave to tell me what you heard, and you were brave to trust your own understanding of what happened. Is Daddy going to jail? The question no 8-year-old should have to ask about their parent. I don't know, baby, but whatever happens, you're going to be safe. I promise you that. Through the bedroom door, I could hear the police officers entering my house, Harold explaining the situation, Marcus trying to present his version of events. But the evidence spoke louder than his explanations. The recorded threats, the sabotaged handrail, the documented admissions, and the testimony of a frightened child who'd trusted his grandmother enough to call for help. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.